Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Viddishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Every Tuesday we are studying Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and because the sacred study is there, and because I'm trying to explain maybe some of the stanzas, and you are listening, this prayer is important. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May that one give us great vigor in our studies. May it give us all-round strength in all our activities, and may we not unnecessarily cavil or disagree with each other. And let all beings be peaceful. Peace, peace, peace be unto all beings. Well, last week we left off around about the 25th stanza of the 18th chapter. And this chapter, just to remind you, is analyzing these aspects of the knower, the knowledge, and the process, and the object of knowledge. And in doing this, taking various segments of our experience and categorize these as we should categorize everything into three aspects. Three dynamic evolutionary forces. The whole of nature is in these three, which we call gunas. And these gunas have the capacity to deliver knowledge to us in the highest sense. And they also have the capacity to delude us in the lowest sense. And this delusion comes about in order to keep things revolving, in order to keep our interests captured. So if our senses are captured by the objects of the senses, that means that this genetic game that we are playing, this biological evolution that we are engaged in, and this internal search for higher perfection and happiness continues and gets sustained. And we might look for it at the more fundamental level, let's say the atomic level, because this urge for freedom, equating to complete happiness and lack of restriction, lack of conditionality, we'll find it at the very fundamental atomic level with the electrons and protons. We'll find it in the forces, antagonistic forces, that is, gravity wants to pull us in, electrical energy wants to disperse us outwards. And maybe these are two opposite sides of the same thing. Maybe they are similar and yet opposite, just like gravity and acceleration are opposite and yet somehow the same. And when we talk of these, we're talking of inertia, tamas, and we can't exactly describe tamas or rajas or sattva except by examples in different contexts, because there's a physical context to it, and then there is a mental context to it, there is an intellectual context to it, there is an energetic context to it, there is a cosmological context to it, there is a behavioral context to it, and it's the behavior that we are really relating to knowledge. There are no bad people, there is only bad behavior. And this behavior is deep down in the unconscious psychological area, what we might call the habit area. And we'll find in many of these descriptions, there's a gradation. What do I mean by that? We can take some examples. But since we left off at the 25th stanza, let us start with that, but just to remind you where we have come from. An action which is ordained, which is free from attachment, which is done without love or hatred by one not desirous of the fruit, that action is declared to be sattvika. I'm going to review what we have gone through just to refresh our memories. So, any action, what action do we take? If we review what has gone on today, the minute we got up, there was an activity. And the minute we were alert, the brain started moving. Thought is an action, just as any other thing is an action. In fact, thought often promotes actions. And actions that are rehearsed and learned, they settle down in the unconscious area and they come up without our knowledge or thinking about it. Spontaneously, instinctively, they come. But this is all a result of learning. It's all a result of accumulated knowledge, layer after layer after layer. And if we take the evolutionary process as it is meant in the yogic way, we can trace this origin way, way back to this atomic level where only hydrogen existed. Not just biological evolution, but way back. Now, if we take a great puzzle today will be, how do we get life, living matter, organized cells, complex, and yet knowing how to repair themselves, how to respond, even at the most fundamental bacterial level, single cell level, and how can this arise, this fundamental life, even viruses. And there's an academic debate whether virus is living or not. I think most people would agree it is a living thing. But how do we make this transition between inorganic life, chemical life, pure chemical life, crystalline life, if we can call it that, and proper life that seems to be infused with some kind of knowledge? And so when we discuss knowledge, we're incorporating such things as information, action, and ownership, and a sense of individuality. So we were told that an action which is ordained, which is free from attachment, which is done without love or hatred, by one not desirous of the effect of the fruit, this action is declared to be sattva. And I think when we analyze all our actions that we did today, just today, or within the last hour, it rarely falls into this category. Don't be disheartened. We need this technique of being alert. And all of these things which we're discussing require a psychological self-awareness. Not being the mind, not being the activities of the mind, not being the personality, which we call a mask, not being the sense of a body, mind that we normally take for I can now correct it. If this is my nature, then I cannot correct it. But if this is not my nature, if my nature is something deeper, more profound, this is the whole message of the Bhagavad Gita, the whole message of the Upanishads, is all telling us this one thing. Thou art that. You are this entity. You are the soul of the soul. You are this absolute entity that doesn't move, that is unchanging, that is immutable, unchanging, that is infinite, and so on. All of that is you. But you don't know it. And so not knowing it is actually called ignorance. When we talk about knowledge, we're not talking about academic knowledge, therefore. So all of your actions that are done, that is, all of the actions that are done in reaction, as it were, to the things that are known, all of these can be watched. And if we watch it with dread or fear or any of these negative aspects of the mind or of our reaction, it adds to our habitual negativity. So we have to find some way of dealing with it and some philosophy that deals with it. And I may have mentioned before, there's a very fundamental, wonderful philosophical approach that says what we call life is a game of life. There's a book by Florence Scovel, and about 1938, I think it came out. And I recommend it to all beginners in the subject. It's called The Game of Life and How to Play It. So it is taking Shakespeare's All the World's a Stage and We Are But Players extremely seriously, even though it's a play, so as serious as you can make a play, and saying, okay, we are but players. Then why should we be upset by anything? This concept we need to repeat time and time again. And this is endorsed by Sri Krishna in the 13th chapter that we came across. Know that if this is a field, a body is a field primarily with the mind and so on, all of these aspects and parts to the human entity. If we can call this a field, and its range of activity also a field within a field, if you like, know that all these fields are separate from the knower, but the knower is within all these fields. Know that all these fields, I am the knower, says Krishna, in all these fields. Fields of what? Fields of activity. Now, what action would we find to be ordained? Well, we have to eat, we have to drink, we have to sleep. These are indispensable to life. But we also have to use our skills and abilities. And these are individual to us. These fit within the other aspects of life to create a harmony so that not everybody can do everything. If you're building a building, not everybody can be an architect. Not everybody can be an interior decorator. Not everybody can be a mason or a roofer or any of these things, or a plumber. So we have certain duties, and these duties are particular to us. And so Sri Ramakrishna, just to remind you of this, says a man of this sattvika nature, this pure nature, this nature devoid of any agency or any sense of agency, makes no show of their spiritual practices, because one of the most difficult areas of egoism is spiritual life. See? In discussing things, you may let out slip accidentally. Oh, yes, I went into Samadhi last week, you see. Oh, and what was that like? Oh, I shouldn't have mentioned it. So all of these, so this is very subtle, a very difficult area, that there is the spiritual pride as well. So a person of this pure nature makes no show of spiritual practices, and as far as possible, keeps their holy doings concealed from public gaze. Very often we are asked about our spiritual experiences and practices, and we're not inclined to share them. That's our private thing. And we don't want to raise up either our own ego or raise up being the possibility of being put on a pedestal, and that has the inadvertent effect of raising our ego. So while others are asleep at midnight, he sits up within the mosquito curtain and meditates. And last week we asked one Christian person who was present here about Jesus's biblical quotation on that we pray to your Father who is in secret. And then we went on to that action which is done by one craving for desires, or again with egoism, or with much effort, that is declared to be rajasika. And we explained that. And desire, we explained, was of two kinds: what promotes man's ethical progress, which induces spiritual anguish, which aids service to beings. A desire of this kind, of course, is wholesome. So when we say you should not have desires, you should quench all desires, this is emphasized in system, for example, in the Buddhist practices, that nirvana is the extinction of all desires. But what about the desire for freedom? What about the desire for peace? So these are all legitimate desires. From a devotee's point of view, what about the thirst and desire for a vision of God? These are not the desires that we are talking about. These are the desires which are associated with self-interest. And we know that anything that is associated with self-interest, otherwise known as egoism, egocentric activity, these are rajasic. These fall into this category. The very fact that man owns a body is a mark of egoism. You say, I own a body. Even if you state that much, sign of egoism. And so, Ramakrishna, we left this off. How does a wicked egoism assert itself? Don't you know who I am? I am so much moneyed, is what people say. Is there anybody superior to me? Is their inner I saying it? Unspoken, and yet in their bearing. In this fashion, it makes itself felt. Now we come to where we left off, and that is the 25th stanza. Anubandam kshayam himsam anapeksha cha porusham mohad arabhyate karma yaktat tamasam uchyate. Just to be clear what tamasic action is, that action which is undertaken from delusion. I'm going to pause there. What do we mean by delusion? You see, if you want to know what is tapas, sticking to the truth is the tapas of this age, says Sri Ramakrishna. Now that's a very simple statement, but has so many intricate ins and outs. Because what is the truthfulness? First of all, behaviorally, truth must be a match of thoughts, word, and deed. Everything has to match. And we have to have a truthful outlook on life. But taking life for what it is at superficial value, that is at the sensory level, is not truthful. It is only relatively so. We have to look much deeper for an absolute truth that doesn't change. And so looking for truth, seeking for truth, speaking truth, aligning ourselves with truth is the primary tapas of this age. And we can see this because all over the place in the media, for the first time, we have come across a phrase, fake news. And now it's become a universal phrase. Everybody says, oh, fake news. If they don't like it, they say, oh, fake news. Fake news means this is news I don't want to hear, and this is not my point of view. I have a different point of view, and my point of view is right. See how egoism is coming in. See how damaging this point of view is. But a sattvika outlook, a pure outlook, will be a listening outlook. It will have empathy enough to listen. When we disagree in matters, for example, of different religions and faiths, the only way around it is to understand so many faiths, so many paths, as Sri Ramakrishna puts it. And we may not agree necessarily. That path may not be suitable for us. And a point of view may not be our point of view or something that we like. And yet, if we have an understanding, compassionate heart, at least we will listen to try and catch the other person's feeling about it. Catch with a sense of empathy. Listening is all to do with observation and empathy. We have to look, what is the hidden message? Now, behavioral psychologists will tell us that most of the communication we perform is nonverbal communication. It's in a look, it's in a posture, it's in a gesture. You must have traveled all over the world, or maybe in some places that you're not familiar with, not speaking a language, but you'll find there are some common gestures that everybody has in common, and you can more or less get by pointing, or by making a gesture, or by simulating some object with your hands, something along these lines, even drawing a picture. So some communication can be there, and every species knows how to do it. A dog does not speak Bengali, English, Malayalam, Tamil, or American, because American has a separate language, so some people say. And yet, we can communicate with the dog. If you look a dog in the eye, you're challenging the dog, beware. The dog will take it as an aggressive thing and go for you. It knows your body language. If you are fearful of an animal, it knows it. It can sense it. It also watches carefully. It has to for survival. So our language is all like this, and we have to make sure that we are observing, in my humble opinion, says a politician. But of course, we know that few politicians have a humble opinion. The words and what is being, meaning have become different. And then we have to stand where the other person stands. That's very important. Now, this non-egoistic position is always sattvika. But then what is this tamasic position? So that action which is undertaken from delusion, that is unknowingly, without heed to the consequences, that can damage you and can damage society, just impulsively, in other words. Before you know it, it's come out. And then regret, of course, may follow. Don't forget, the sattva, rajas, and tamas is not necessarily a permanent state. It's an alternating state. Sometimes we are sattvic, sometimes we're rajasic, sometimes we're tamasic. But the more tamasic you are, the more likely your nature will be like that. The more rajasic you are, the more likely your nature is like that. But we have the combination of all three. So what is salvation? I jokingly say, if you want a minimum quantitative measurement of it, salvation or freedom, if you will, is 51% minimum sattva and 49% other things. Of course, once you increase it, that's fine, but you'll never get 100% sattva, because then your life is gone. We need rajas and tamas. We need some energy, and we also need peacefulness. We need to sit and do nothing sometimes. At other times, we need to be active. But at all times, we need to be devoid of ego. And the only way to do that is to increasingly remove the delusion. What is this delusion? The delusion is that this world is real and it's not. That this family will live forever and is permanent and it isn't. That any family is mine and it's not. We are all God's children. And if we have children, so to speak, and if we have the capacity to act, so to speak, and if we gain the fruits of our activities, so to speak, none of this belongs to us. That has to be rehearsed and reiterated time and time again until we relinquish the sense of prophet-actor complex. So, from delusion, because it's deluded, and delusion also brings with it confusion. And delusion also brings it, the impulse comes out as anger and all other things, without heed to the consequence, or to the loss, or to the injury to oneself and to others. And the law of nature says that if I do some harm to another, it's actually to myself. This is the law of reciprocity, that every action will have an equal and opposite reaction, because whether you are looking at things from a physical point of view, from an energetic point of view, and from a spiritual point of view, or even a mental point of view, only one entity is there. Only one mind is there, according to the Sankhya basis that all of the Indian philosophies adopt from this point of view. From the point of view of gunas, all the varying philosophers adopt this. And so there's only one mind, cosmic mind. Sankhya's call it Mahat, this great one. We found out in the 4th chapter how this categorization was condensed by Sri Krishna into 8 things. Do you remember? So all these categories squeezed into these convenient things so that we can make a step-by-step journey back to the origin, back to the source. Meditation is this process of going inward, back to the source, involving, as it were, and then evolving out again, coming out again. But when we don't do any of this, we are deluded and are stuck in that delusion. And delusion is a fantasy. What we call reality is really, to the person of knowledge, fantasy. And so selfishness reigns. Why would we bother about consequence? There is a philosophy called consequentialism, that I only do some moral deed because I understand what the consequence of it is. This would be a rajasic action. When I don't even care what the consequences are, then this is tamas. So that is declared to be tamasic, and Sri Ramakrishna says it is only after the practice of intense tapas, and we can reduce it to this one thing, and that is practicing the truth. But intense tapas, we can go a little further. Remember in the 17th chapter, we went into tapas of the body, tapas of speech, and tapas of mind. And we can go into the subcategories of that, because the physical tapas starts with worship. We start with worship. And it doesn't mention any details about it, but we can add our own details, because what your worship is not necessarily my worship. Your expression is yours. And so some of it comes out as cultural expression, but all of it must be rational. All of it must be with understanding and meaning, and all of it has to be with resolve. And that is why understanding and resolve is also mentioned and categorized in these three ways according to the gunas. Anyway, so it is only after the practice of intense tapas that men are freed of guile and stinginess, because the real enemy, the real obstacle is this self-image, is this attachment to an instrument called body and an instrument called mind. An attachment to all the results under a category, I own these, this is my ownership. I may have said many times before, but I never know who I said what to sometimes. But I was asked to facilitate at Trinity College some kind of symposium where Israelis and Palestinians came together to see if they could find common ground. And both sides were willing to do that, because in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the hatred and the ill feeling over land is so extreme, it is very, very dangerous to go into various areas, and some land has been newly occupied and so on. It's a very dangerous and complex system, but emotions run extremely high. You know, when I was asked to facilitate, I said, but you see, I'm not a Muslim, and I'm not a Jew. For that very reason, they said, we want you to facilitate it. Now I remembered Sri Ramakrishna's story that God laughs on two occasions. And so I told Israelis and Palestinians together, I said, you know, God laughs on two occasions. Never mind about the first one. The last one is when two brothers, aren't we brothers in humanity? And on the spiritual level, we are one, whether you know it or not. But when two brothers argue and fight over land, this is my land, no, this is my land. And to the extreme, in this case, I'm quoting, of killing each other over this land. And why is God laughing? Because God says, listen, my children, this is my land, not yours. And so it is this sense of ownership hooked into this individuality where our biggest delusion lies. God vision comes to them who err free from crookedness and cunning. Because when you're egoistic, you'll always scheme how you'll get some advantage over the other person. But in the name of simplicity, man should not become a simpleton. What a profound statement. What a beautiful statement. In the name of simplicity, we should not be a simpleton. There can be nothing simpler than iron. Iron is the dumbest stuff in the universe. Nothing can tap into it. It doesn't go anywhere. Or a rock, at least a rock will erode and turn into sand, and so it goes on. But the simplest thing need not be a simpleton. There's an atheistic argument I heard once. We can acknowledge that if there is one source of the universe, it must be a simple. Because we've got all this complexity as a result of increasing complexity through evolution. And so the beginning must be extremely simple. And if it's simple, then it cannot be intelligent. Because intelligence, from a materialist point of view, is equated with a brain. But a brain is just an organ, just a network of neurological firings. A whole lot of electrochemical wirings going on, with an electrical current going on, and the necessity for electrolyte. The electrolytic component of the brain is extremely important. That's provided by food. So we can't say, you see, that to resolve it to the simplest thing, we can very often result in simplest meaning simpleton, dumbest stuff. It doesn't go anywhere. It has no intelligence. This is the tamasic element. It is good, says Ramakrishna, to be a devotee, but bad to be a dullard. Sometimes the two look the same. And it depends on our projection. Projection is a psychological term. If we are dullard and we see somebody in a state of nirvikalpa samadhi, for example, we'll assume that they are sleeping it off in a state of simple, blissful dullness. Same mistake is there in meditation, of course. Very often, this expression to do with meditation is, we should empty the mind as if it was a garbage can and we're taken off by the county council at some point in time, or by the waste product divisions or hire companies that do the recycling and things. They'll collect your bin. So you say, don't I have no opinion about anything. Why not? I threw my mind out with the garbage. And the recycling people, they took it. I don't know who has it now. So that would be an absurd position. And often this idea, emptying the mind, making the mind blank, dulling the mind, and so on, none of this is meditation. All of this will lead to dullness and ultimately indolence and sleep. Know what is right and do what is good. Ignorance of this is what is called tamasa. And I think there's a wonderful commentary on this particular stanza. Now, after dilating on knowledge and action, we go on to a different section now. And so the Lord now tells us about agency. Mukta sango naham vadi tratayut saha samadvidaha siddhya siddhyo nivikara karta sattika uchyate. One who is mukta sangha, free from attachment, and who is anaham vadi, non-egoistic, no philosophy or point of view of I-ness, endued with firmness and enthusiasm. Don't think that a sattvic person has no enthusiasm. There's great enthusiasm. But endued with firmness, resolve, we might say, fortitude, courage, and zeal, enthusiasm, and unaffected by success or failure is called sattvika. Why do we do an action? Typically because we want some result which is successful. And some may avoid it if it's a failure. And if it's likely to be failure, not to attempt it at all. We want to be successful, and in an increasingly materialist world, we want to be seen to be successful. And there are many people who will encourage you to set goals and objectives and be successful. Success is everything. Many positive thinking books and lectures and workshops and expensive seminars are dedicated to this subject of setting goals and then going for them with great enthusiasm and positivity. After all, isn't it better than sitting, doing nothing, blanking off your mind and being a dullard? Absolutely. But it's only second gear. Top gear is having no goals, transcending them. So in counseling and so on and so forth, in dealing with people, we encourage people, go and get the highest thing, exploit your full potential. You took an MA, good. Now go for your doctorate. After the doctorate, go for something higher. Get the best qualification you can. But it's not that the sattvic person is not achieving, so to speak. They are also successful, but they don't care for it. They're not aiming for it. And so whether they succeed in activity or failure means nothing to them. In fact, any pair of opposite means nothing to them. Praise and blame means nothing to them. Like water off a duck's back. So this agent is free from attachment. That is the one who is acting, non-egoistic, endued with firmness and zeal, and unaffected by success or failure. And again, in order to make this assessment, to say, where am I now? Every activity should be observed in a fun way, in a sporting way. Remember the game of life? To see what is our status quo, and then given the fact that there's a flow of time, how can we put something new and different within it? So it comes back to a different view, shifting your view. Instead of claiming that this body is yours, revalue it as God's temple. And whatever action takes place with that body as the instrument is doing the Lord's work, to whom the temple is dedicated to. So I'll repeat many, many things that I have said. Instead of a person who really understands this will not dedicate in any way their energies toward correcting health. They'll dedicate all their energies to cleaning because they revalued this body is God's temple. And therefore I should clean the floor of it. I should clean the walls. I should clean the inside. I should sweep. I should polish. The outside too, I should paint. I should clean. So, a very different approach. That being the case, I can't claim anything of my own if this is the case. And if I want to understand how a fire is put out by a fireman, fire being put out by the fireman, can you claim that you put the fire out? As a fireman, you ask, did you put the fire out? The person with sense of age says, yes, I put the fire out. It was me alone, nobody else, and the rest of the fire department, of course. But when I put this hose in this direction and aimed at this square inch and this window, it put the fire out. Thereafter, I went into the smoke and rescued people and so on and so forth. Once the fire was quenched. But this is philosophically inaccurate because did you put the fire out is a question to the fireman, or did the water do it? You have to say the water did it. What was your role? I simply stood there directing here, there. Same in meditation, Lord here, Lord there. Lord's flow of grace is there, Lord here, Lord there. Please go through here, go through this door, go through that door. Let us explore this channel, this road, this avenue. Together we can do it. It's God's energy being used. I think people are tired of me citing the same examples, but I'm completely oblivious to that, so I'm happy to repeat them. You see, when I go on a trip and people say, oh, you went on such a long trip driving all the way, are you not tired? Why should I be tired? I sat all the way. I never walked, I never cycled. Just sitting in the car, doing a few adjustments here and there, that's all. What physical energy was expended? Why should I be tired? Supposing you value everything as Lord, this is your energy, nothing to do with me. Lord's energy is inexhaustible. How can I be tired? So this revaluation is there. Same thing with the mind. The mind make God's sitting room and then dedicate to cleaning through meditation. So the one who is attached to the fruit of his work, they get elated in success, dejected in failure. But the person who just does the duty as the command from the Lord, as what they're designed to do, what they're destined to do, what their particular designated role is there to do, and they carry it out faithfully as just their duty and in an instrumental way. So when the archer misses the target, it's no fault of the arrow. And when he shoots it successfully on the target, credit doesn't go to the arrow. If you think that you are an instrument, see Francis of Assisi's prayer, make me an instrument of your peace or a channel of your peace. Shifting that attitude, you can't say, I did this, I did that. We have to learn to make this shift. Now, Sri Ramakrishna makes this useful comment. That soft soil alone, which is free from pebbles and stones, is favorable for the seeds to sprout. If you want it to sprout well, you have to take the trouble to dig up all the rubble and stones, put them to one side, take them away, and all the weeds with it, put fresh soil in there, topsoil and so on, and compost. Then the seeds will grow. Make it loose. They won't grow in hard soil. Nourish it. And similarly, the mind, he says, of that devotee alone, untainted by perversion and conceit, is best suited for the Lord to reveal himself in. This perversion, a distortion of the mind, a difficult way of thinking to suit our desires or our egoistic ambitions. And this is just conceit. A great, great difficulty and obstacle in spiritual life. Ragi karma para primpshu lubdho himsatmako suchi harshat shok kanditaha karta rajasaha parikrititaha. Ragi, passionate, desiring to obtain the fruit of action, greedy, cruel, impure, moved by joy and sorrow. Such an agent is said to be rajasic. Let's explore this. Again, I just reiterate that if we are to take these passages in any way with great value and seriousness, we have to observe what is the state of the mind at any one time. Is a psychological process that dissociates from the mind, is able to observe it as a witness. And having seen, see, any of these things, are they occupying the mind? That is, that we want something obsessively. We have a great passion for it to the point that everything is driven toward it. So this passion and desiring to obtain the fruit of the action. Now here we find a progression. So supposing, even previously, I should point out there's a progression. Let me point it out. Let's step back once. You see, if I'm free from attachment, and if I'm free from a sense of ego, then as a result, I will be endued automatically with firmness and enthusiasm. And I will be unaffected also by success and failure. As a result, it's a logical sequence of events. Let's take, for example, the logical sequence that we find here too. If we are able to deal with our passion, or if we don't, if we are just allowed to happen, then what will well, the next thing that is on the sequence, in the line of it, will be, then I have a desire to obtain the result of it. Passionate means it's an internal thing. If that internal thing is there, then the external action will have to be there. The desire for the fruit will be there. I want the result of it. I see the object, if you will, and want the fruit of it. Now, two types of desire will be there. One will be, on every level, there'll be a desire. There'll be a physical desire that the senses will need to respond to. And then there will be a psychological desire also, an emotional desire. For example, a desire to be needed or feel needed, a desire to be rewarded for actions, a desire to be thanked, a desire to be good, even a desire to be good, is only because of self-interest, because on the other side of it is a fear, say of punishment or of something going wrong. A fear of evil drives me to good. Still, it is in the realm of egoistic desire. It is for my own good, or to avoid something that will harm me, that I don't like. And so, if we obtain the fruit of the action, it leads to greed. Next thing is greedy, to be greedy. Greedy means luptaha, means I want to repeat it. I don't have enough of it. I fill up, but it's not enough. I have to fill up again and again and again, and probably in increasing quantity, because the original thing never satisfied me. Can we see the beginnings of addictions? So we can be addicted to something. All of us along this rajasic line will have this kind of addiction. You may not be addicted to alcohol or drugs or any of these things that we highlight as serious addictions. Nevertheless, you'll find if you examine it carefully, these are addictions. Another word for attachment here, addiction. It's a very strong word, but let's be honest about it. And so this leads to cruelty, because with self-interest promoted, we don't care how others will feel. We want it purely for ourselves. And the ends will often justify the means. So lack of empathy will take place. If I have love of myself, love of the others will not be there, will go away. Impure, what's the definition of impurity? This delusive feeling that this world around me takes a priority, and the most significant, important entity is me. Moved by joy and sorrow, you can say very easily moved by joy and sorrow, a very tentative position. If I have all of these things built up and such high expectations, then I'm easily disappointed or let down. So joy and sorrow will be very, very close, will be on the fringe, on the border, will easily come out, and instability will be there. So such an agent is said to be rajasic. Sri Ramakrishna says this: cunning is no virtue. Cunning, planning to get some kind of result, calculating in this way. Nobody is more cunning than a crow, he says. Now, we have to be fair to crows. They're not intentionally cunning, but you see, we can take that advantage. You can watch them carefully and see how they watch out and how they behave. They're opportunists. It steals artfully. It is ever alert, lest it should be caught. It exploits the helplessness of little children. I extend this example to seagulls, because seagulls that are allowed to be near humans. I was once at a seaside place in England, and people were eating all kinds of things that were sold on the pier, and flocks of seagulls were there, used to all the sundry food that was available and was around, thrown away here and there. They didn't wait for something to be thrown away. Something in their hand, they'll swoop down and snatch it and go off with it. In Africa, we have a different problem. It's baboons. In Table Mountain, where many tourists go in Cape Town, there's lots of baboons, and you're warned, do not feed the baboons, because they take advantage and they will catch what you eat. They'll even put themselves into cars and do that kind of thing, and they will snatch straight away. Now, never mind about that. We also had an experience there in a nature reserve on the way to Uttakumund there in Tamil Nadu, and we got out, and unfortunately the window was left a little bit open, And so before we know it, there is a monkey there on hind legs. And before you know it, it's in the car and prepared to hiss and bite also, and going into the back. And what a clever thing it was. It was targeting one particular small packet, one particular item, some biscuits. Yeah. It wasn't interested in anything else. It must have seen the biscuits and then took that and then sat calmly and unwrapped the biscuit and ate in confidence. So all these animals would be ever alert lest they should be caught, and they exploit the helplessness of the vulnerable. And all the same, it is out to eat filth. It doesn't discriminate. These are people of the nature of the crow. They are deceitful, calculative, and cunning. You may not like these descriptions, but when you analyze it correctly, you'll see these are the characteristics of this rajasic behavior. But their one concern day and night is to grab low and vulgar things. Such people are incapable of taking to the path of spirituality. Incapable because that's their entrenched habit, unless they change it, of course, and elevate it to a sattvic position. Ayuktaha, praktaha, stabdaha, shato, nashkrityo lasaha, vishadi, dirga sutri, cha karta tamasa uchate. The wonderful technique of scripture is to say uchate, that is, it is said. If somebody challenges you, you say, no, they said it, it is said. And then that means I'm not egoistically saying this myself, because it is common knowledge. All the wise say these things. And this is where the credibility of these stanzas comes from. So, ayuktaha, unsteady, and then prakrita, vulgar, and then stabdaha, stubborn, unbending, unyielding, and then shataha, cheating, nashkritaha, malicious, alasaha, lazy, otherwise fairly good people. See, unsteady, again there's a sequence of events that you can trace. If you are unsteady, then you'll be crude and vulgar. And if you're crude and vulgar, you won't budge from your position. You'll be stubborn and unyielding. Now, unsteadiness, what does it mean? It means that there's an insecurity. They're not steadfast in any habits, just ad hoc behavior. And then that means there'll be a crudeness, because they won't respect your time, your schedule. They won't respect the norms, the standards, the cultural values. They may be crude on different levels, crude in their dress, crude in their physical behavior, crude in their body care, crude in their hygiene, and crude in their words and their attitudes. And so this leads then, because they don't wish to change, stubborn. You see, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them think. And stubborn, therefore. And out of stubbornness, you can see a sequence, deceitful, because they need to protect that stubbornness. And they will lie to retain that. And then malicious, not only stubborn, but malicious, because self-interest is paramount. And they have no values. If they're vulgar and all these things, they'll have no values. And indolent, completely lazy, despondent because if you're indolent and lazy, you'll go into a state of blankness, dullness, and ultimately depression. Psychologically, you'll do that. And then procrastinating. I'll do it when I feel like it. When will you feel like it? Never. So such an agent is called tamasic, and I think you get the general idea. So you can see, is it better to be a dullard? Is it worse to be a dullard than to be an active, doing person who has objectives and energetic, even though selfish interests are there? It's better to be rajasic. but better still to be sattvic. And therefore, we have to take our, as I said before, take note, what is the status at this given moment, and see how we can elevate it one notch up, and then go back and see the next second, how does it feel? Let us get out of it and move it to a different level. Now, the person who practices self-control, self-discipline, self-dedication, they grow in steadfastness. So unsteadiness means that no self-control was practiced, no self-discipline was practiced, and no self-dedication was practiced. And some people are just like that. And you can't shift them out of that, nor are they willing to be shifted from it, because they are stubborn and you can't do anything. You're wasting your time. Not that you're a reformer. Leave them to their own devices is a better thing. Nature has a way of shifting them out of it. But they're also shirking their duties. And they're not harnessing their talents. They're not using their full potential. Don't forget Swami Vivekananda's wonderful statement. Each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this from within. But all education is a manifestation. And all knowledge is a manifestation of that which is already within you. Despondency, of course, can be a disease of the mind, and it requires a radical cure if that's the case. And this was the state of mind, don't forget, that Arjuna had when we began this whole Bhagavad Gita, a state of despondency. He was in a tamasic condition. And Sri Krishna points out the sattvic element straight away, but also uses the rajasic arguments and says, get up and do. Now Sri Ramakrishna tells a story. He says, a fisherman cast his net and caught fish in a river. Now many among the catch lay quiet within the net, making no effort to escape. Some of them made unsuccessful attempts, tried to jump but didn't get anywhere. But a few somehow managed to jump out of the net. And in this same way, people of the world are of three sorts. Those who make no effort for emancipation. This is tamasic. The aspirants who seek deliverance, these are the rajasic. And the liberated souls, those who practice sattva, and ultimately this revelation, put the mind in the condition where revelation can occur easily and naturally. So the gradations of understanding and firmness we now go on to. And we now have followed the propensities of the mind, going from the physical to the mental, and now we're going to go to, and the behavioral, now we're going to the behavior and sense of understanding. That is, we're going to the buddhi, the intellect. So we'll start on this and continue next week. Now these two things are grouped together in this first exposition, this first stanza. It says, Buddha bhedam drishyash chaiva gunatas trividam trishnu prochyamanam asheshena pratakdena dhananjaya. So here, the threefold distinctions of understanding and firmness, according to the gunas, as I explain them exhaustively and severally, O Dhananjaya. Of course, buddhi, as I mentioned, is the understanding or the faculty of distinguishing between good and bad. And so here we bring in what is morality. What do we describe as morals and ethics, good social behavior? And so the three grades of this power, as always, driti denotes firmness of mind, which we'll discuss after discussing buddhi, because you cannot get anywhere without resolve. Previously, before this broadcast, we were informally here discussing aspects of tapasya and what is the obstacle toward any systematic practice, spiritual practice. And it comes down to one thing. If we resolve something, if we have a resolution, if we have a determination, this is what we want, we'll go and get it. We'll get it. Nothing will stop us. These three ingredients are there, mentioned before: desire, determination, dedication. Put has 3 Ds: desire, determination, dedication. Everybody, if you look back on your life, anything you ever got, these 3 principles were applied, for good or bad. You desired something, the desire became so strong that you were determined to get it and remove any obstacle toward it. And then you were dedicated to it. It was a magnificent obsession. Done in spiritual life, what a wonderful thing it is. Done in material life, you'll also get the consequences. It'll be a rajasic. But the sattvic version is like this. So if we have a firm resolve in spiritual life, where does this resolve come from? It comes from discernment. It comes from viveka. It comes from understanding what is real, what is unreal. See this prayer that we say so often as a peace prayer, taken from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. See, asato ma satkamaya. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from the darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. These 3 are interchangeable terms. They mean the same thing. But what we say by real and unreal is not something that is tangible or intangible. It is something that is permanent or impermanent, something that appears in a flash and disappears, something that changes over time. We have to put into the basket the category of unreal, because it is not always real. It comes and goes. Now, when we look at life in general, is there anything that does not come and go? But what is the thing that neither comes nor goes, but observes it all? This is Krishna's original position in persuading Arjuna. There's one single Atman, and never comes, never goes. And the reason why we teach these philosophical principles with the practice, meaning emotions have to catch up with it, is because if we don't see this, if there's no reason to change, we won't change. And if there's no reason to change, we won't have any resolution. And what drives the resolution is emotion. And this is why nature builds in. This is why the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is there to show us the value of pain. Mother Nature has this inbuilt pain in us so that we reap what we sow. And pain is often the more effective teacher, because at that moment where we are pinched, we are inspired to change our course and change our habits, therefore, and do something differently. Understanding this formula doesn't work, a new formula has to be devised. And so if we don't have any reason to change, the whole resolve is gone. And the sequence of events is going backwards, going more interior. So the mind is there, behavior is there, senses are there, and so on and so forth. Knowledge is there. How do we get knowledge? How do we know something exists? Because objects are there, picked up by the senses. And now we come to understanding. But behind understanding would be a will, a resolve. I will do this. So this is why these various stanzas are important. And we'll finish off with this one last stanza, stanza 30. And we'll go back. We'll of course, reiterate some of the background to it. Maybe before we go on to the 30th, which is dealing with the intellect, and either with its sattvic, with its rajasic, with its tamasic, and what are the gradations of it, and what are the descriptions of it. Let us end with Ramakrishna's story here. Dolls may be made of sugar, cloth, and stone. The sugar doll soaked in water dissolves away. The cloth doll absorbs plenty of water, but doesn't lose its individuality. The stone doll does not allow water to percolate. Men who are prepared to merge their individuality into the supreme self, Paramatman, are like the sugar doll. Devotees that imbibe bliss and wisdom from the Lord are like the cloth doll. And the hard-baked worldly man who is proof against godliness is like the stone doll. Sri Ramakrishna has this art of presenting a simple example like this, a simple story to illustrate something so profound that is worth contemplating on. Now, very often I'm asked in these sessions, this is all very well, all this philosophy, what is their practical application in any of this? So I'm going to tell you the practical application of what we've done so far. We have to learn between now, let's say, and next week will be useful, to stand back and see the state of the mind and what is it's doing and what its urge is. And then to see, time being available, what to put in to elevate the mind to a more illumined and harmonious condition, devoid of expectation, devoid of attachment to rewards or fruits, simply doing our duty. That means employing the full scope of our talents and skills and abilities, representing God's grace arriving at our substation called body-mind, and doing this for the greater glory of the divine. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.